Nachman's teachings about bringing others back to God. In Sefer Hamidot, Nius, one of his great writings, he writes, the way to make amends for wasting the seed, for masturbating, is to try to bring people back to God. Isn't that odd? This almost greatest of all sins among the rabbis, Nachman says, can be amended, not by repentance even, or anything else like that, but rather by bringing others back to God. Now notice it says back to God. It doesn't say back to the Torah. It doesn't say back to Judaism, really, seriously. It doesn't say back to any of those things. It says that this heinous crime, according to the rabbis, which is counted as murder by the rabbis, this heinous crime of masturbation, which is treated as murder by the rabbis, one can make amends for it by trying to bring people back to God. How many of you hear that? raise your hand. I mean, that's really not what you would expect a great rabbi to say. You would expect him to say the way all the other rabbis say, the way to make amends for wasting the seed and masturbating is to do heavy repentance, to give tzedakah, to be more and more observant of the Torah. That isn't what he says. Bringing others back to God. Listen to the high calling of doing what I'm doing and others like me do. I'm not saying I'm the only one, because that's what I'm doing, especially now in this generation, bringing people back to God, away from the ego, which they think of as God, and back to God. Then in Likutei Moharan, another one, probably his greatest work, Nachman wrote, bringing people back, that is the way to make amends for impurity. Bringing others back to God, that is a way of making amends for impurity. By omission, what it's saying is even greater than the mikveh, the ritual bath of the ritual water that Christians call baptism. Orthodox men go every Friday night and immerse themselves in that ritual water to rid themselves of any impurities. But this is saying even more than that, bringing people back to God. Bringing people back. This is the way to make amends for impurity. It is written, quote, if you return and I bring you back, you will stand before me. And if you bring forth the precious out of the vial, you shall be as my mouth. Quoting the prophet Jeremiah. Listen to that again. This is a antinomianism that Nachman very subtly introduces in his own teachings. It says, if you return and I bring you back, you will stand before me. And if you bring forth the precious out of the vial, you shall be as my mouth. Now, how can you bring forth the precious from the vial without entering into the vial? Obviously. This is the antinomianism of Sabbatai Zevi, finding its way into the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And this is not the only place. In the very last lesson of his life, Rabbi Nachman explained the incalculable greatness of bringing a new soul into the community of Jews. Notice it says, a new soul into the community of Jews. Not another Jewish soul, but, obviously, a Gentile soul. As we do, by bringing all of you into the community of Israel, by asking you to say the vow of Ruth to me, which we do frequently. Here, we're going to read how Rabbi Nachman speaks of the incalculable greatness of doing that in Likutei Moharan. With each new fellow Jew who joins, listen to this, with each new fellow Jew who joins. First of all, notice it is who joins the Jews. This is saying, with each new fellow Jew who joins the Jews. This is to say that any Gentile who joins the Jews by entering the house of Israel through the vow of Ruth is a fellow Jew. He's not a visitor or any such thing. He is a fellow Jew. Nachman says, with each new fellow Jew who joins the Jews, the prayer becomes very much fuller and greater. We see in the Zohar there are passages that discuss that without the entry of the Gentile into the house of Israel, as members, fellow members of the house of Israel cannot do its work fully of reuniting God. How many of you remember that? We see that in the Zohar, strongly stated in the Zohar, and here, Nachman is stating that thing exactly. How many of you can see that? Raise your hands. Excellent. All right. He says, the more souls gathered together in every greater numbers, the more the house of prayer is enlarged and magnified. This is a demand that the Gentile be brought into the house of Israel by the Jew, not into the religion of Judaism. That is not what it's saying. It's talking about the house of Israel, this metaphysical concept. This metaphysical house of Israel, which is not a religion, but a state of intention and consciousness. The more who are brought in, the more who are indeed grafted in, which you remember was, according to Paul, Christ's intention was to graft on the Gentiles to the house of Israel. The more that is done by Jews, the greater the prayers, the more magnified and enlarged the prayers become. This is not looking for converts to Judaism. Let me make that very, very clear. This is not speaking of converts to Judaism. This is talking about Gentiles who enter the house of Israel and become equal to the descendants of Israel as members of the house of Israel and the community of Israel by entering in. And by entering in by doing what Ruth did with a Jew by birth, myself, for example. Nachman goes on, for 3 stones build 6 houses, and 4 stones build 24 houses, 5 stones build 120 houses, and so on, until the mouth cannot utter it, nor the house, the heart, conceive it. That's in the Sefer Yetzirah. Now he's quoting the Sefer Yetzirah. that extraordinary, ancient work of Jewish mysticism, pre-Zoharic. Here, Nachman is speaking of what we talk about, the critical mass. There are not 4, 5, or 6 people in each class here. Each of you represents 1,000 others who will hear these classes. I don't know if you realize, but over 160,000 people from all over the world come to our Dharma West website to listen to these talks. Talks which I give only because all of you are here. If you were not here, there would be no talks. You are the critical mass. It goes on, for the stones are souls, as in the holy stones have been poured out at the head of all the streets in the book of Lamentations. The houses are the house of prayer. As it says, quote, my house shall be called a house of prayer. So house of prayer is a synonym for the house of God, which is another word for the house of Israel. With every additional Jew, the number of houses multiplies gigantically. That is to say, he who is grafted unto the house of Israel as a Jew greatly magnifies and multiplies the house of Israel gigantically. Not Jews from birth, but Jews by adoption. They don't become second-class travelers. They become Jews. Not by going to the mikveh, but by allowing themselves to be brought into the house of Israel by a fellow Jew by birth. Each one multiplies the number of houses gigantically. Notice the word gigantically. For the stones are souls, as in, quote, the holy stones have been poured out at the head of all the streets, unquote, from the book of Lamentations. The houses are the house of prayer, for it is written, quote, my house shall be called a house of prayer, unquote, from Isaiah. Each time one new soul is added to the ingathering of Israel, the house of prayer is mightily enlarged and magnified. Notice what it says. It doesn't say with each new Jew. It says with each new soul. Each time one new soul is added to the ingathering of Israel. The ingathering of Israel is not the ingathering of all the Jews by birth, but the ingathering of the Gentile who becomes a member of the house of Israel by ingathering. And each one is a stone of souls. The houses are the house of prayer, for, quote, my house shall be called a house of prayer. Each time one new soul is added to the ingathering of Israel, the house of prayer, the house of God, is mightily enlarged and magnified. Not the Jewish religion, but the house of God. For when one more soul is added now to the ingathering of Israel, the ingathering of the Gentile into the house of Israel, vastly new and different combinations are created. The numbers involved are incomprehensible. When one fellow Jew is added, the prayer becomes incalculably fuller and greater. As the prayer grows, so sin is forgiven. This is healing. What does this refer to? It refers to bringing the Gentile into the house of Israel. Not the Jewish religion, but into the house of Israel by the Jewish people who are already members of the house of Israel. And the Gentile who grafts onto the house of Israel by having taken the hand of a Jew to enter into the house of Israel becomes a Jew who can also ingather other Gentiles. Rabbi Nathan, Rabbi Nachman's great follower who wrote down everything Nachman did and said, discussed the mathematical progression, because that's what Nachman is talking about. He's talking about a mathematical progression in the multiplication of the so-called houses. Now let me point something out to you about mathematics. This is, I think, apocryphal. I don't know if it's actually true, but I have been taught. Nachman was such a genius that he observed the law against studying Torah or even praying while sitting on the toilet. And by not wasting one's time while sitting on the toilet, by teaching himself mathematics when he sat on the toilet, taking a dump. That's the kind of genius he was. He was a mathematical whiz. And so we see that these are mathematical progressions he is speaking of. And the same kind of mathematical progressions that the Sefer Yetzirah, which he just recently quoted, also speaks of. And the previous total of houses. For example, at first there were 2 stones which built 2 houses. For the 2 stones can only be put together in 2 combinations. When a new stone is added, the number of houses is increased to 6, this being the product of the new number of stones, 3, and the previous total of houses. Does anybody know what that's called? That's called the exponential. It is a very, very solid concept in mathematics. How many of you have heard of exponential? That's exactly what he's describing. The mathematical concept of the exponential. Things do not increase just by the addition of that which comes after them. And so, what Nachman is speaking of, as explained by Nathan, is one of the concepts of mathematics that he learned while sitting on the toilet. The exponential. Then when 1 more stone is added, making 4, the number of houses increases to 4, multiplied by the previous total of 6 houses. That's exactly what you do with the exponential of a number. What is the exponential of 7? It's 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. That's the exponential. That's what this is saying. If you continue with the progression, you will see that 13 stones make 6,227 million, 20,800 houses. If you understand the principle of the progression, that is the principle of the exponential, you will be well able to appreciate how much each additional stone, each of you who have taken the vow of Ruth, that is, each new soul, multiplies the number of houses when added to the assembly of souls which already exist in the house of Israel. we'll stop here. And it's just, I think, an extraordinary teaching. We'll stop here for this morning, and we'll continue with this next Sunday. But for the meantime, let me ask for comments, questions, feedback, reactions. Yesod, raise your hands, please. Go ahead, Yesod. Yeshai, go ahead. Yesod says, kick-ass supernova exegesis. Nachman's message is so timely, like hot off the presses, indeed. Absolutely. Have experienced a few Jews, actually two, being a light unto the nations. You especially, Abbaji, and how beautiful it is, have also experienced the very many, majority of Jews, not being a light unto the nations, and even spitting on and making fun of the Goyim. And how sad it is, from the Gentile side of the fence, I can testify, so very many would join in Jacob's house, though very few Jews invite them. On the contrary, I would add, but reject them. Baruch Hashem, thank you. Well said, he said. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. Absolutely true. It is a scandal that the Jews, rather than doing what God has commanded us to do, which is to be a light unto the Gentile, and to gather them up into the house of Israel, rather than doing that, we reject the Gentile. Or they reject the Gentile. Mock the Gentile. Well said. Makes me angry, as I'm sure it does you, Esau, and you have every reason for being angry at that. Having been mocked and rejected by the Jews, as you've been. Well said. Yeshai, go ahead. Ilan or Drew, if anything you want to say, just raise your hand. Yeshai and his son, you'll send the recording to our dear friend who is entertaining guests from out of the country right now. Thank you, Yeshai. Yeshai, go ahead. Waiting for Yeshai. Waiting. Yeshai, hello. There we go. Amazing, radiant teaching. Do you know that Zohar means radiance? In Hebrew, it means radiance. Amazing, radiant teaching shown forth by the Bat Kol in you. Thank you. Antinomian genius. Clearly, you've got to go into the vial to retrieve the precious. Well said. Even on the toilet to bring down mysteries. Baruch Hashem. Thank you, Abbaji. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, Yeshai. Thank you. Great comment. All right, everyone. Our next class will be the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, if I'm not mistaken. And as I said, we'll only take a half-hour break from now on, rather than 45 minutes, so that we'll start our next class at 11:15